Welcome back, everybody, to Chapter 15, the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation. Okay, that's not what the chapter was called. It was called Post-Reformation. And there's no math involved that I'm going to talk about today because I'm not the math teacher. And my daughter better not say thank the Lord, but that's okay. Anyway, so spiritual freedom does not, as you read this week, equal political or economical freedom. Sounds a little bit like when I was thinking about the Jews, okay? So when they were waiting for their Messiah to come and to free them from the political and hardships of the Roman Empire, they were waiting for their Messiah to be a conquering king on a white horse, okay? But Jesus' freedom was eternal life, okay? And freedom from separation from God. Spiritual freedom. Not exactly what the Jewish people were looking for, okay? And so it's sort of kind of the same for the peasants during Luther's time and area. They were excited about their new spiritual freedom and change and having God's word, but they wanted more than just the spiritual freedom. Okay, but not everybody was thrilled about this newfound spiritual freedom, i.e., our favorite person to talk about, the Pope. The king wasn't excited about it. The nobles and the lords of the manors were not excited about it. Okay? When the Messiah came, the Romans and the priests and everybody else were not excited about it, but the people were. Okay? The peasants were excited about this new reform that Luther was pushing. Now, Luther, though, had noticed that there was some fire burning on both sides. The peasants wanted the nobles and the lords to treat them fairly and justly, since now everybody could read the Bible. And the nobles and lords liked feudalism just how it was and did not want things to change. Okay? So hence the peasants' revolt. Okay? The revolt was a miserable idea and it failed horribly due to the fact that the nobility was able to slaughter up to 100,000 of the 300,000 peasants and farmers that sadly tried to fight for their newfound freedom and right. One of the most famous supporters of the possible instigators was Thomas Müntzer, a German preacher theologian of the early Reformation. Let's take a second and take a look at what he looks like, and I'll tell you a little bit more. Here we have Thomas Müntzer. He disagreed with the Catholic Church, and he also disagreed with Luther's compromises with the feudal authority. He led the uprising in 1525, known as the German Peasants' War, but of course was captured after the Battle of Frankenhausen and then tortured and executed. Lovely. Here we have a 16th century falconet, which was the kind of cannon that they would have used during the skirmishes in that area and during that time. Next is a picture of the Barren Chalk Gully, the probable site of one of the skirmishes on May 14th between the king and the peasants. Now, 30 years later, the Peace of Augsburg was written up. Here's a front page of the document, okay? It was a compromise agreement that was met between Charles V and the Schmalkaldic League, which was a military alliance of the Lutheran princes that lived in the Holy Roman Empire. Next is a picture of the Schmalkaldic League's military treaty. Notice everybody's seal, the wax engravings of each of the princes in agreement. This is the treaty that bound the princes in allegiance to each other during the war. And even with all the fight and war, the Reformation, at least in Germany, began to fade. All right, so even though the compromise was drawn up, it wasn't really that much better of a treaty. All right, so now you just had two different religions you could pick up from instead of just Catholic. So you had the Catholics and you had the Protestants. All right, but you didn't get to choose how you worshiped. It was the governing lord or nobleman or the prince over the area. So if you lived in this village and they were practicing Catholicism and you didn't want to do that, you had to leave your house and everything, your village, and you had to go over here to the Protestants, okay? But if you lived in a village where the Protestants were told they must practice this way by the governing lord, and you didn't want to do it, then you had to uproot yourself, drop your hat, and leave. And you had to go find a village or somewhere where you could move in at and practice Catholic, okay? So it wasn't really all that great, because remember, you read about other religions and other faiths sprung from the Protestant Reformation, like the Anabaptists and the Baptists, the Mennonites, and so on and so forth. But those were not allowed, and you couldn't just read your Bible and practice however you wanted to. You had to do what was told to you, okay? So freedom wasn't really the freedom that they thought they were going to have. Worship and belief, once again, was told to them, all right? And state-controlled churches were the new say, once again. Now, speaking of people say, don't you kind of wonder what the Pope was thinking during this time? Because nobody likes sharing their power, and now his power has been kind of split and taken from a little bit. Well, turns out that Pope Paul III was considered to be the very first pope of the Counter Reformation, okay? He was also one of the popes who convened or was sitting in on the hearing of the Council of Trent that you guys had read about, okay? The council was took such a long time, so many years, that two other popes also were a part of it. Pope Julius III and Pope Pius the Fourth, okay? Many things were decided during this council. Among them were that they were going to get rid of the indulgences. No longer could you pay to get out of purgatory sooner, to get to heaven faster. You couldn't pay for the forgiveness of your sins. Supposedly that was taken away. They also, though, condemned the Protestants' doctrine or belief of justification by faith. And they also condemned any of the Protestants' versions of the Bible or any of their pamphlets. They were to be burned, which was lovely. Another wonderful thing that came out of the Counter-Reformation was the Inquisition. Now, you guys had read about that and how scary, awful that was. But it came back to control and to weed out the Protestants and pretty much destroying them in Spain and putting the brakes on the spread of Protestantism throughout the Europe nations. Starting first with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, the Inquisition lasted over 700 years total, okay, with the last execution in the name of the Inquisition being in 1826. Really, that's not that far back that was still allowed and going on. The height of the Inquisition lasted for 200 years, and during that time, 32,000 people were executed. Yikes. Okay. Speaking of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, let's take a second to look at a few pictures and remember some of the things that happened when they first began their reign and the start of the golden ages for Spain. Okay, so do you remember this castle in Granada, Spain? It is the home to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Remember them? Their reign started the golden age from Spain and exploration. Now, from them, they passed their crown on to their first son, Philip I. He became king when he was 16 years old and married Joanna, who was also 16. Now, all of a sudden, he died of typhoid fever and poisoning when he was only 28 years old, leaving his first son, Charles I, to become king at the age of 6. Here you have a picture of Queen Joanna. She was Charles I or Charles V's mother. It's confusing to me that he was named Charles I, but when he became king, he was called Charles V. But anyway, she was to be co-monarch with him, but because she lost her mind and became known as Joanna the Mad, she was imprisoned until her death at the age of 75. Pretty sad. So now you have just a little bit of information on Philip I, Charles's father, and his mother, Queen Joanna. And you did read about Charles V and how much land he acquired during his reign, and his love and devotion for the Catholic religion. It got passed down to his son, Philip II. And so some of our time is going to be talking about him. Philip II, when he became king, his reign was at the height of the power and land control of Spain. He had control of Spain and Portugal for a time. He had control of Naples and Sicily. He was king of England and Ireland when he was married to Queen Mary I for 4 years, okay? He had Milan and the Netherlands. I read somewhere else that he had control of the Philippines as well, and any of the land colonies that were in the Americas during the exploration period. So he had a huge amass of power and land that he was in control of. But he wanted England. Okay, there was a little, we'll call it tiff between him and the new queen, Queen Elizabeth I. And so I have a video that I want you guys to watch about it. It's called the Spanish Armada. And I'm sure you've heard of that before, but I found it interesting because they had fire ships. But so, get out your piece of paper for your very first pop quiz. Remember, these are required and a part of your grade. They are worth a whole quiz grade. So, get out a piece of paper. And for this video, there's 4 questions. Question number 1. In what year did Queen Elizabeth refuse Philip II's marriage proposal? Probably not the best way to start a relationship by saying nope. That might be why there was conflict between Spain and England. But anyway, what year did Queen Elizabeth refuse Philip II's marriage proposal? It will actually give you the number on the screen when you watch the video. Okay. Number 2. Who did Philip want to use to replace Queen Elizabeth with? Okay, he had a plan, and he had somebody else in mind that would take the place of Queen Elizabeth in England. Who was that? Okay. Number 3. In what formation did the Armada sail in that made it hard for the British ships to attack them? Okay, what formation? Did they sail in a square? Did they sail in a line? How did they sail? What formation? It's called something. What was it? Okay, and the last question is, how many ships actually made it back to Spain after this attack that didn't go over very well? How many ships made it back to Spain? Okay, go ahead and watch the video about the Spanish Armada, and then come on back and we'll continue. So, after the Spanish Armada, Spain and Portugal's power started to fall off the scale. But even though they never regained the power that they once had, they did leave a lasting impression in the Americas and the surrounding islands. So let's take a look at some of the things that they did contribute and bring to the Americas when they colonized it. Okay, so the Spaniards brought cows to the Americas. I didn't know that, but here's some pictures, some different breeds of cows that were brought. They also brought pigs. I found out that they brought barley and wheat, something that we take for granted as we've got wheat growing everywhere out here. Well, they brought it, okay? They also brought horses, okay? So the Iberian horses, which are these 2 breeds, were first brought over. And then you have the Paso Fino, and those were brought by Christopher Columbus to the Caribbean islands, and the Peruvian horses to Peru, of course, and the Mustangs were brought to North America. Okay, they also brought sugar cane and started planting it in the Caribbean islands, and then they brought cloves and gingers. The first almond trees were first brought by them and planted in California. All right, now that we've talked a little bit about Spain, let's head on up north to the Netherlands. Now, before we talk about the Reformation and what happened in the Netherlands, let's just take a second to look at some of the geography. It's fun to look at what the land looks like there and some of the things that the Netherlands are best known for. So hold on a second and we'll go take a look. So NASA pictures are my favorite of the overview of what the country looks like. This is the lowlands or the Netherlands, okay? And so you can see just how beautiful this land is. There's many canals and dikes and things because the land was mostly underwater until they rerouted it, the water that is, so that they could use the land better. Now, Gouda cheese comes from the Netherlands. It dates back to 1184 and it was first made by the farmers' wives. There are still 300 farmers that traditionally make it still. And the step gables, it's also something that the Netherlands are most known for, this style of architecture. You can see it best in this house here. And just the beautifulness of their architecture is great. Like I said, they're also known for their dikes and for using their windmills the best in order to be able to farm. Now, I also learned that tulips, of course, everybody knows they come from Holland, but they originally came from Central Asia. The Dutch merchants brought them during the 1600s, and it was first for the wealthy, but then the middle class wanted them as well. And so the tulip became a symbol for wealth and prosperity and tied definitely to Holland. Okay, the Netherlands, take 12. You guys, I never knew how much work it was to make a video. I watch YouTube videos and I think to myself, wow, those are flawless. Now I know how long it takes to get them that way. Nevertheless, the Netherlands and the Protestant Reformation made it there and they were ecstatic and widely was it accepted, all these changes for the Catholic Church and a breaking away from it. But sadly, Charles V, who was in control of the Netherlands, did not like it. Now, he didn't do too much about it at present, but when his son Philip II began to rule in Spain and had control of the Netherlands as well, he stepped in and sent in the Spanish Inquisition. All right, he was not happy about what was going on. Everybody needed to come back to the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church, and he was going to see that it was done. All right, just like he was trying to work on England, he was trying to work on Netherlands as well. It got so bad, the Inquisition in the Netherlands, that at one point they just condemned everybody. That would have been like, I think I read, 3 million people they condemned for heresy, crimes against the church. They condemned them to death. Well, we can't stop a few people, so we'll just condemn the whole country. I can't even imagine. Okay, so do you think that went well with the people? Well, of course not. You guys read? No, they did not stand for that, and a revolt happened, okay? So William the Silent of Orange boldly led them into a revolt in 1568. Okay. Later on, he was considered to be an outlaw by King Philip II. Imagine that. In 1580. And in 1581, the Netherlands declared that they wanted to be independent from Spain. 3 years later, William was assassinated, and so he didn't get to see the end result of his revolt and the fight that the people led against the king and against the Catholicism. All right. But this revolt was called the 80-Year War, and that's how long it took, 80 years. And finally, in 1648, the Netherlands were free from Spain, and they rejoiced. Now, one of my favorite vegetables or roots, or I'm sure somebody will correct me on this, is a carrot. And if you want to pan to my peoples, alrighty, that's good enough. And even my camera girl likes these carrots. And I had to find out, now that I have a mouthful. Okay, did you know that carrots were originally white, yellow, and purple. Okay. During the 1600s, the legend says that the Dutch growers cultivated orange carrots as a tribute to William of Orange, who they said were the father of the revolt and the independence of the nation. Okay. So, the people who led the Dutch independence and the color stayed. So 1,000 years changed in just one generation, so they say. The beta carotene, which is vitamin A, is what makes the carrots orange. And it seems that the purple ones have an even higher level of the beta carotene than their orange cousins. But the Dutch first started selling the orange variation to the French and the English, and they loved it, and so it just stuck. So just a side note about carrots and how they got to be orange, and I like carrots. So I'll be right back after I finish my carrot, and we'll talk about England. All right, enter in the English Reformation. So remember back to some chapter, like chapter 13, when we talked about the War of the Roses. Well, it was really a power struggle between two of the strongest noble families, the Yorks with the white roses and the Lancasters with the red roses. Now, Henry Tudor, as pictured here, was related to the Lancaster side and had won the final battle and became Henry VII, the first Tudor king. So beginning the modern age in England. All right, so Henry VII got married to Elizabeth of York, and so that way the two noble families had their marriage done so that there would be no more fighting, okay, and then there was peace between them, and then so Henry VII became king. Between those two, they had 8 children, 4 of which survived. Arthur was the oldest son, and there was a daughter, and then there was Henry VIII. He was the third child. He became king when he was 18 years old. Now, Henry's first wife was Catherine of Aragon. She was the daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Unfortunately, she had been married to Arthur, Henry's older brother, who was the Prince of Wales, but he had died 5 months after they had gotten married. He was only 15 years old and she was 16, and he died. A little bit longer after that, she then married Arthur's brother, Henry, and then Henry became Henry VIII, the King of England. I hope that makes sense. So, the one thing I couldn't wait to tell you was when I was your guys' age, you know, back before there was dirt, and because I'm oh so ancient, we used to sing this song, and it was popular, and it goes something like this. I'm Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am. I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before, and everyone was a Henry.
Henry!
Never had a Willie or a Sam. I'm the 8th old man, I'm Henry. Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am.
Second verse, same way as the first.
A whole lot longer and a whole lot worse.
Thank you, my peoples. So after singing this song, when I was reading about Henry, I thought to myself, that song's not very accurate. So I did a little research, and it's a little sort of kind of accurate. Okay, so the widow next door would have been Catherine, right? Because she had been married to Henry's brother, but he had passed away. The other part about being married 7 times before isn't true. Now, Henry's last wife, he had 6 of them. His 6th wife was Catherine Parr. Now, she had been married twice before him. Then she married him, and she was a 6th wife, and she was the only one that outlived him and survived. It was pretty much, I think it was divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, and survived. That's the lineage we had with poor Henry's wives. So before I talk any more about Henry, I want you guys to watch the video that I sent you about Henry VIII, and then come back and we'll wrap up this chapter. Alrighty, so that was a pretty cool video. I really liked the way the guide taught. But so good and bad did come from the beginnings of the English Reformation. And yes, Henry broke with the Catholic Church, but he also did use and enforce some of the Catholic doctrine in the new church he started, which was the Church of England. Okay. After Henry's death, his son, Edward VI, became king when he was only 9 years old. Okay. And he had been engaged to marry Lady Jane when he turned 15. But unfortunately, he died just before his birthday, probably of tuberculosis. And so, since he was being raised by a Protestant minister, and the people who were leading England in his name were Protestant, and so to ensure that the nation stayed Protestant, they wanted Lady Jane, who was to be the queen, to reign next. And so they had papers signed that she was going to lead. But when the king had died, in comes Mary the First, and she was Edward the Eighth's first daughter, and she had been raised Catholic because her mother Catherine was Catholic, and so she had an army with her and said that she was the rightful heir, and so she wanted to be queen. And so Lady Jane's father had an army, but Lady Jane was still taken captive and put in the Tower of London. And later on, because she wouldn't change to become Catholic, she was executed. So it's kind of sad. But Mary the First starts her reign as Queen of England, okay? She wanted the nation to go back to Catholicism. And to enforce that change back, she would do anything that needed to be done, whether it was forcing the people, torturing them, or killing them. And to further bring on the heat, she decided that she would marry Philip II of Spain. And she was 37 years old, which is really old for a queen back then. And when Philip came, he brought the Spanish Inquisition with him. And like your book says, 300 people died right off the bat for being a heretic or going against the Catholic Church. So even though they both wanted this, the people would not accept Philip as their king, and he went back to Spain, like you read. The people hated the queen. She was never able to have a baby, so she never had an heir that would be next in line after her. And I figured it out. She only reigned for 5 years. It's like 5 years of terror. But even though she persecuted the Protestants, they just got stronger. Kind of like what happened with the early Christian church. The more persecution they went through, the stronger they banded together. And so that was the end of Bloody Mary the First. Next week, when we continue chapter 15 and finish it out, then we'll start with Good Queen Bess, or Elizabeth the First. And so we'll learn about her and see how the rest of the chapter goes. Thanks, you guys, for watching. And make sure your homework is turned in to me. And I know it's January when you're watching this, but it's almost Christmas time when I'm recording. So I'll see you guys soon.